Let go of the pain. A Zen story on releasing resentment. There is a dry, grating tension that locks itself into the corners of your jaw when you spend your evenings mentally rehearsing an old betrayal. It is an abrasive kind of friction, a heat in the chest that tells you that if you just keep the memory sharp, you will finally be safe from ever being discarded again. Right now, as the shadows in your room stretch thin and the cold glass of the window pane grows opaque with frost, you might be gripping that invisible cord. Your fingers are clenched, holding the heavy posture of an injured sentinel, even though the immediate world around you is completely out of range of that past harm. Perhaps you have noticed how your wrists ache when you try to rest them on the mattress, because the mind is still pulling a massive mineral weight through the corridors of yesterday. The ambient hum of the house is fading out, and the simple, crisp scent of cotton sheets is the only texture left in the stillness. You can feel the cool air settling over your hands, inviting them to uncurl, while the midnight silence covers the floor like fine desert dust. Tonight, your exhaustion is not a sign that your spirit is permanently flawed. It is simply the natural consequence of dragging a massive maritime tool across an arid wilderness, where there is no ocean left to conquer. We often believe that if we keep our indignation burning brightly enough, we can create a defensive barrier that prevents the next strike from breaking through our defense. We treat our grievances as a reliable armor, polishing the sharp edges of our resentment to ensure we never forget the pain. But there is an immense difference between protecting your heart and keeping it locked in a dry vault. Tonight we are going to explore a quieter truth, a gentle perspective from the Buddhist tradition that offers an entirely different way to heal from the injuries of the past. In a moment, we will begin a journey toward a wider, cooler internal space, where your protection is no longer measured by how much old metal you can haul through the dark. Consider this unexpected paradox, which lies at the center of emotional freedom. The mind does not become safe by hardening its boundaries around an ancient scar. It becomes safe when it realizes that preserving a grievance is like dragging a heavy iron ship anchor across a parched canyon, mistaking the weight for a shield. We often confuse our bitterness with a form of wisdom. We mistake our constant vigilance for a guardian angel, believing that if we relax our anger, we are simply inviting the world to hurt us again. But your repeated replaying of that old injury does not punish the person who caused it. It only wears down the delicate fabric of your own current peace. Buddhist wisdom points out that your ill will is a burning stone, held with tight fingers while you wait for the ghost of your enemy to pass by. You are the only one who bleeds from the grip. Right now, maybe you have felt this too in your own body. This bone-deep weariness that comes from holding on to a defensive stance, while your foundation screams for rest. You might have noticed how your breathing hitches when a familiar name crosses your mind, or how your stomach tightens when you imagine a future confrontation. Your system is telling you that it has run out of rooms to store the salt of old wounds. As you lie here in the gathering isolation of the night, let the support beneath you accept your full structure. You do not need to pull the rope right now. You do not have to prove that you were right. Nor do you need to force the past to change its shape before you are permitted to sleep. The entire inventory of your old calculations can be dropped onto the floor for the next few hours. Think of this quiet interlude as a soft invitation to let the rough fibers of the rope slide out from your tired palms. You are secure enough in this dark space to let your defense mechanism dissolve. There is no need to finalize the argument tonight. You do not have to achieve complete forgiveness or settle the score before you let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the immense quiet dark of the room serve as a natural border, separating your current rest from the dry canyon of your old memories. In a moment, our path will lead us down a desert canyon, where a single traveler learned what happens when you bring a sea tool into an environment of sand and stone. For now, just permit yourself to be here, breathing slowly, letting the heavy iron of the day sink into the quiet earth below. Imagine a landscape of broken shale and pale sandstone, stretching out beneath a sky that has forgotten how to weep. A young traveler named Takashi walked through this high, sun-baked canyon just as the heat of the afternoon began to dissolve into a dry, purple dusk. The desert air was thick with the scent of bitter sagebrush and heated dust settling into the folds of his coarse linen tunic. Takashi was breathing in short, shallow gasps, his boots sliding against the crumbling gravel, because attached to a thick hemp rope around his waist, he dragged a massive, salt-crusted iron ship anchor. The metal was ancient, pitted with deep craters from some long-forgotten ocean, and covered in a thick, white crust of dried mineral salt that flaked off in the dry breeze. With every mile he traveled across the high plateau, the heavy iron teeth scraped against the bare sandstone, creating a loud, grating scream that echoed off the high canyon walls. He had dragged this immense weight for months, ever since a betrayal in his coastal village had left his world shattered. In his left hand, he carried a small, notched wooden tally stick, its surface completely covered in deep, sharp lines carved with a small knife. Each notch represented a specific insult, a broken promise, or a moment of ridicule he had suffered, a physical inventory of his grievances. He kept his fingers locked around that wooden stick with a fierce, trembling intensity, believing that if he stopped counting the lines, he would lose the protective anger that kept him moving forward. He was convinced that the heavy anchor behind him was a necessary shield, a massive metal barrier that would prevent anyone else from ever getting close enough to cut his heart open again. The strain of the rope was pulling his shoulders back and compressing his spine, forcing his chin upward in a rigid posture of perpetual defiance. He could not look at the vast orange horizon, nor could he feel the quiet transition of the desert evening. His entire reality had narrowed to the bitter taste of mineral salt on his dry tongue and the deep, throbbing ache in his forearms. A sudden turn in the canyon wall will soon reveal a small, forgotten oasis, an unhurried space where the real purpose of his heavy burden will be put to a quiet test. At the intersection of two ancient caravan trails sat a low outpost made of rough stones, where a single, twisted juniper tree managed to find moisture deep beneath the parched soil. This was the dwelling of an elderly weaver named Master Ren, who spent his quiet evenings repairing torn wool saddlebags for the few travelers who crossed the high plateau. As Takashi stumbled into the clearing, the iron anchor groaning loudly behind him, Ren was sitting on a sheepskin rug outside the stone wall. The old man's fingers were calloused but incredibly flexible as they slid between the coarse wool threads, his face calm in the fading light. He did not look up immediately as Takashi approached, nor did he offer any word of surprise at the strange sight of a maritime tool in the middle of a desert. Takashi collapsed onto a flat slab of sandstone near the old weaver, his breath tearing through his dry throat in ragged gasps. He leaned against his knees, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and exhaustion as he pointed to the massive iron object behind him. He began to explain how many injuries he had survived, how the villagers had wronged him, and why he must keep dragging this heavy iron to ensure he never became vulnerable again. He showed Rin the notched wooden tally stick, pointing to the deepest grooves as proof that his resentment was entirely justified. Ren slowly laid down his wooden weaving shuttle on the sheepskin rug, his movements completely devoid of haste. He did not argue with the young man, nor did he attempt to minimize the pain of the old betrayal. Instead, he reached out with one lean hand and gently tapped the white, crystalline crust that covered the top of the iron anchor flukes. He picked up a small pinch of the white powder that fell away, rolling it between his dry fingertips before looking into Takashi's eyes. He asked the young traveler why he was spending his life using the salt of an old ocean to poison the dry ground of a desert crossroads. Takashi blinked, his mind locking up in sudden confusion as he stared at the weaver. He argued that the anchor was his protection, that if he untied the rope, he would be completely defenseless against the hostility of the world. Ren merely pointed down at the ground beneath the heavy iron teeth, where a deep, ugly scar had been plowed into the soft red earth, destroying the tiny green shoots of desert grass that were trying to grow in the shadow of the stone. The master remarked that an anchor cannot stop a blow that comes from the front. It can only drag the person backward into the deep waters they claim they want to escape. The old man's voice seemed to absorb the immense silence of the canyon. Takashi looked down at his own palms, seeing the yellow calluses and the red, raw skin where the hemp rope had burned his flesh. Week after week, he realized that the desert had no water, that there was no sea for this anchor to hold onto, and that his anger had only turned the dry trail into an endless path of friction. In that quiet moment, as the first evening star appeared over the canyon rim, a deep wave of weariness rolled over his body. His fingers, which had been clamped around the notched tally stick for months, began to lose their tight rigidity. Slowly, his thumb relaxed its hold on the small piece of wood. The notched tally stick slipped from his hand, rolling across the sandstone until it fell into a deep crack between the rocks, out of sight. The thick loop of hemp rope around his waist suddenly felt incredibly tight, a binding wire that was suffocating his breathing. He reached down with trembling fingers, unfastening the heavy knot that held the harness together. The thick fibers unraveled with a dry hiss, and the massive iron anchor settled flat against the sandstone with a dull, heavy ring that echoed once through the canyon and then stopped. Takashi fell forward onto his hands, his chest rising and falling as he took in a deep, unobstructed breath of the cool desert air. The physical weight was gone, yet the sky did not break, and his enemies did not appear from the shadows to strike him down. He lay there on the cool stone, listening to the wind pass through the dry juniper needles, feeling the sudden, vast emptiness behind his back. But the young traveler did not yet see that dropping the iron tool was only the first threshold of the lesson master was preparing to show him. When the physical weight of an object slides from our frame, the body responds instantly with a wave of relief. But when we have spent years carrying the emotional salt of an old betrayal, the release requires a much softer kind of looking. This quiet encounter at the desert crossroads is not an instruction for you to stop feeling the very real pain of your past encounters. It is not an invitation to turn your heart into an unyielding stone wall, or to pretend that the injustice you suffered did not matter at all. Buddhist wisdom does not ask us to erase our memories, or to become completely cold, indifferent statues who look down on human injury with detached superiority. Instead, it invites us to examine the invisible harness we wrap around our own midsection every time we refuse to let a completed event remain in the landscape behind us. The exhausting friction you feel right now does not come from the fact that you were hurt. It comes from the heavy assumption that by dragging the memory through every new relationship, you are somehow building a fortress that keeps the next betrayal away. Consider how this patterns itself into the quiet movements of your mind during the deep hours of the night. You might notice a sharp spike of heat in your throat when an old conversation floats into your awareness, or when a specific person's face flashes behind your eyelids. In those moments, your mind instinctively reaches for its old tally stick. You begin to trace the deep notches of how unfairly you were treated, stacking the historical evidence up in front of you to justify your current suspicion. We tell ourselves that if we keep our indignation perfectly sharp, if we remember the offense with enough intensity, we will be prepared for the next blow before it lands. This is what attachment looks like when it wears the mask of protection. It is the persistent, exhausting belief that we must remain locked in an aggressive posture toward life to prevent our boundaries from being overrun. The deep insights of the Buddhist tradition point toward a much cooler way of resting alongside the realities of a flawed world. They remind us that people will occasionally act out of their own deep confusion, their own blindness, and their own unhealed greed. When those events happen, it is like a sudden strike against a delicate skin, a sharp primary wound that carries its own natural sting. But the true agony that wears down your spirit over months and years is the secondary layer of weight that your own mind adds to that mark. By replaying the scenario every evening, by dragging the massive iron anchor of your resentment across new sandstone trails where that person no longer stands, you are the one who continues to plow deep furrows into your own internal peace. You are punishing your current self for an injury that was finalized a long time ago. True mindfulness is simply the capacity to observe the old scar on your arm without picking up a small knife to carve the wound open again. It is the quiet space that grows inside your chest when you realize a bitter memory is just a passing cloud of mineral dust, not a command to go out and fight a ghost. When you practice this kind of clear awareness, you begin to see that the person who wronged you has already moved on, walking down their own path through the canyon, entirely unburdened by the scream of the iron you are dragging. Your anger is not changing their path, nor is it forcing them to see the depth of their error. It is only drying out the moisture in your own throat, turning your current life into an endless series of dry, grinding trails. By letting go of the rope, you are not letting them off the hook. You are finally letting yourself out of the prison cell you built around their memory. In a moment, this perspective will begin to settle into your physical structure, moving from an idea in your head to a tangible loosening in your palms. What if your greatest duty to your own life is not to carry the heavy evidence of your survival, but to allow your internal soil to become soft enough to grow something new? When we mistake our bitter guardrails for a holy act of wisdom, we become blind to the beautiful, cool spaces that are available to us right now in the present. The desert canyon of your past does not have to dictate the temperature of your bedroom tonight. Let this realization wash over your tired mind like a cool evening dew, dissolving the hard, white crust of salt that has kept your heart brittle for far too long. If it feels right to you, let your awareness slide down away from the world of calculations and settle into the simple, quiet rhythm of your body resting. There is no need to alter your breathing right now, or to force your abdomen to move in any unnatural way. Perhaps you can just watch the cool air as it passes through your nostrils and the slightly warmer air as it leaves your lips. With each slow exhalation, you might feel the heavy bones of your wrists sinking a little deeper into the mattress. Your body has been standing at the crossroads all day, holding the rough, dry fibers of an old defense mechanism. But right now, your only task is to watch the steady tide of your own system. Let the tiny muscles around your mouth soften, releasing that hidden, tight grip you have been holding against the injustices of the past. As you rest here in the quietness, you might notice a specific memory beginning to circulate, an old bitterness about an unfair moment, or a familiar urge to defend yourself against an ancient slight. Instead of fighting that movement, or judging yourself for having a restless mind, see if you can simply give it a gentle label. You might tell yourself that this is the pattern of guarding, or this is the old habit of pulling the iron. Even noticing the presence of this internal friction is completely enough. There is absolutely no requirement for you to fix it or force it to dissolve tonight. Just allow the sensation to occupy its space, noticing where it registers in your physical structure, whether it lives as a heat in the back of the neck or a cold knot in the center of the stomach. Now, if it feels comfortable for you, visualize that exact grievance as a patch of white, brittle mineral salt encrusted upon a heavy iron surface. Imagine your mind directing a cool, steady gaze toward that white powder, watching it begin to flake away from the dark metal beneath. You do not have to scrape it off with force, nor do you have to punish yourself for having preserved it for so long. Just see the white crystals turning into fine, harmless sand, falling away between your fingers and dropping onto the dry canyon floor below. Notice how your palms feel when you mentally loosen the thick rope that has been tied around your waist. Let the heavy strands unweave themselves, thread by small thread, beneath the warmth of your unhurried attention. Watch what happens to the internal image as you refuse to pull the weight any further. The massive iron anchor does not vanish into the air, and it does not transform into a magical cloud. Instead, the dry desert wind slowly begins to blow fine red dust over the iron flukes, burying the sharp edges under the calm, shifting layers of the canyon floor. The earth does not demand that you remain in a state of warfare to prove your survival. You can return to this wide, unburdened space whenever you are ready, knowing that the ground is fully capable of holding what you choose to let drop. For the next few breaths, let your chest remain open and completely unharnessed, feeling the simple coolness of the night air as it travels through your frame without hitting any ancient walls. In a moment, this expanding clarity will guide us deeper into the parched plain, toward a deep stone shaft where a silent well-keeper is waiting to show us how to receive the water. The skin on Takashi's midsection felt remarkably loose and cool as he moved further inland toward a wide, windswept salt flat. The trail flattened out into a vast plain of cracked white crust where the heat had died down completely, and the horizon opened up into a deep indigo twilight. This lower basin was a place of silent, horizontal expanses, punctuated only by a solitary stone outpost that stood near a deep, hand-dug well shaft. A silent well-keeper named Old Jun lived there alone, spending his evenings cleaning the white crust from the stone bucket pulleys with a small scrap of oiled leather. Takashi entered the circular clearing slowly, carrying no heavy iron behind him this time, but his mind was still fiercely guarded against the memory of the coastal village. He could not shake the bitter conviction that by untying his rope, he had left himself completely exposed to the malice of the world. Near the center of the outpost floor, a deep stone well opened into the dark earth, its circular wall built from rough blocks of volcanic rock. Takashi sat by the edge of the stone rim, his wrists still bearing the faint red marks of the hemp harness he had dragged for months. He observed that the old well-keeper was not conducting any frantic search for water, nor was he digging up the surrounding dirt. He simply sat over the dark opening, waiting for the deep moisture to rise naturally through the parched stones, cleaning a cracked clay water flask with slow, circular motions of his hand. Takashi, however, felt a familiar wave of internal restlessness rising up through his chest as he looked down into the black abyss of the shaft. Every time he recalled the faces of those who had deceived him, a sharp panic would tighten his throat, forcing him to reach for his old iron anchor, which he had dragged into the courtyard. He hauled the heavy iron toward the well rim, intending to drop its sharp flukes down into the dark opening to dredge the bottom of the shaft. He believed that if he scraped the bedrock with enough violence, he could force the deep earth to yield a sudden, pure stream of water to fill his empty flask. He lowered the heavy metal by a fresh cord, pulling and jerking the line until his muscles throbbed, and his breath came in short, jagged gasps, but the dry stone shaft only echoed with the harsh, metallic scream of iron grinding against ancient rock. Every time he yanked the rope with aggressive force, the dry impact sent up a cloud of white, blinding mineral dust that filled his mouth and made his eyes sting with salt. The fragile clay flask he was trying to fill sat empty on the stone ledge, slowly collecting the white residue of his frantic struggle. Old June stopped his cleaning, letting the scrap of oiled leather rest flat against his knee. He did not shout at the young traveler, nor did he pull the rope away from Takashi's blistered fingers. He walked over to the volcanic stones, his bare feet moving across the salt crust with a soft, rhythmic scrape that carried no weight of judgment. He sat down directly across the well opening and watched the young man struggle against the immovable bottom of the shaft until Takashi's arms trembled with exhaustion. He looked at the white dust covering the traveler's face, then looked down at the empty clay flask that remained dry under the rising stars. He asked the young man why he was using a tool designed for a storm to dig for nourishment in a quiet well. Takashi paused, his chest heaving as he gripped the coarse rope with a white-knuckled intensity. He argued that the earth was stubborn, that if he did not strike the rock with force, the well would remain dry, and he would perish from thirst in the middle of this parched wilderness. He insisted that he must stay guarded, that if he dropped his weapon, the hidden dangers of the desert would overtake his life. June merely reached out and touched the side of the fragile clay flask, pointing to a hairline crack that had developed along the base from the violent vibrations of the iron anchor. The old man remarked that a vessel cannot receive fresh water, while it is being shattered by the very tool that claims to protect it. The well-keeper's words seemed to sink straight down into the black water below. Takashi looked at the cracked clay in his hands, seeing how the fine white dust had ruined the clean interior of his flask, leaving it bitter and unusable. He realized that his protective anger had not changed the dry nature of the trail, nor had it punished those who had wronged him at the coast. It had only cracked his own capacity to receive the quiet peace of the present moment. A deep, heavy sorrow settled into his bones, an honest recognition of the limitations of his own defensive fury. He stopped fighting the silence of the plain. He slowly let the rope slide from his palms, letting the heavy iron anchor rest quietly at the very bottom of the dark shaft where it could no longer scrape the walls. He did not experience a flash of perfect, effortless joy. His heart still carried the memory of the betrayal, and the old suspicion did not vanish from his mind like smoke, but instead of yanking the line to force an answer from the stone, He sat completely still and took one long, unhurried breath of the desert evening. He allowed his lungs to expand fully, not to prepare for a battle, but simply to feel the cool, clean air traveling through his own physical structure. He looked down at the quiet opening of the well. With a steady, unhurried movement of his arm, he reached for a simple wooden bucket that sat on the stones, lowering it gently by a soft cotton line into the darkness. He did not strike the stone, and he did not shout into the void. He just waited in the stillness of the outpost, letting the bucket settle quietly into the deep water below, allowing the moisture to fill the vessel without a single sound of resistance. He realized that true safety was not found in the rigid armor of a closed fist, but in the spacious, open capacity of a vessel that knows how to receive the world without fighting the current. In a moment, this quiet transformation in Takashi's heart will bring us closer to the modern entanglements of your own life, where the same choice between the anchor and the bucket is waiting for your attention every single night. This internal shift brings us directly into the quiet engine room of your own exhaustion, to the exact place where your late-night restlessness is manufactured out of an ancient desire for safety. We often believe that our lingering bitterness is caused entirely by the coldness of the person who mistreated us, or by the unfairness of the event that upended our lives. We point to the white, dry salt flat of our history, believing that if that landscape could somehow be rewritten, our minds could finally settle into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. But if you look closely into the shadows of your own room tonight, you might discover a deeper mechanism at work. The true erosion is not the original strike you suffered, but the current, compulsive habit of replaying that strike to keep your defenses sharp. We use our resentment as a heavy fence, spending our midnight hours rebuilding the walls, double-checking the locks, and rehearsing our arguments to ensure we are never caught off guard again. When you look beneath this protective pattern, you find an intense hidden panic regarding the unpredictable nature of tomorrow. We cannot bear the thought that we might be blindsided by another human being's capacity to deceive, so we try to buy our future safety by sacrificing our current rest. We keep our old grievances alive, believing that if we become entirely hypervigilant, we will finally be immune to rejection. This entire cycle is reinforced by a very subtle form of self-criticism, a quiet voice that whispers that if you had been more guarded in the past, you would never have been broken. When you fail to find peace, you turn that agitation into a permanent cloak, wrapping your identity around the very wound you want to heal, until you no longer know who you are without your armor. Buddhist wisdom offers a beautiful transforming distinction that can help your mind lay down these heavy calculations without a single drop of shame. In this life, there are certain inevitable impacts that no amount of wisdom can prevent, like the blistering midday sun of the desert plateau or the sudden fracture of a clay vessel. These are the primary events of existence, the simple, cold reality that people will sometimes act out of their own blindness, causing genuine harm to those around them. This is the raw texture of an unpolished world, however. The suffering that actually breaks your spirit and keeps your jaw locked at night is the secondary weight that your own mind constructs through its desperate resistance to that reality. You are not exhausted by the betrayal that happened a year ago. You are exhausted by your endless internal rehearsal of that betrayal. Think of this distinction through an entirely different picture. When a sudden dust storm sweeps across an open plain, a solitary traveler will naturally feel the sharp sting of grit against his face, and his skin will grow dry from the wind. This is the primary reality of the storm, a simple occurrence in the wilderness that carries no personal malice toward the traveler. His dry skin is the natural consequence of standing in an open space. But if that traveler becomes so enraged by the wind that he begins to collect the sharpest pieces of fallen gravel, squeezing them into his fists until his palms bleed, and refusing to open his fingers because he wants to remember how cruel the storm was, he is creating an entirely different kind of torment. The stinging wind was the inevitable event, but the bleeding hand is the extra suffering he is multiplying inside his own body. True freedom does not come from finding a magical way to banish every dust storm from the wilderness, nor does it come from ensuring that no one around you ever acts with selfishness. It comes from changing your relationship with the gravel itself. It begins when you sit quietly beside the dark well of your own awareness, letting the wind blow over the stones without assuming that you must weaponize the debris to survive. When you stop treating your past injury as an active command to stay at war with the present, a massive, cool emptiness opens up within your chest. You realize that you can acknowledge the scar on your skin without needing to turn your entire life into a fortress of dry, grinding stone. As you lie here in the deep, expanding quiet of the late evening, let this realization act like a cool, gentle rain that dampens the white salt of your old memories. You have spent so long believing that your survival was a result of your vigilance, and you have treated your own bitterness as proof of your strength. But tonight, you can choose to step completely out of that exhausting cycle. You can allow the past to remain exactly where it is, frozen in the landscape behind you, while you permit your own hands to become empty, open, and still. In a moment, we will look at how this ancient clarity can be brought directly into the small, ordinary moments of your modern life, transforming the way you handle your boundaries, your relationships, and your rest. This ancient, silent posture at the edge of the deep well is not meant to be left behind on the desert salt flats, for it belongs directly in the center of your hurried modern mornings and your anxious afternoons. Think of how this old habit of pulling the iron anchor manifests in the quiet friction of your modern routine. It is there when you stare down at the cold, glowing glass of your phone, watching an empty chat window and waiting for a specific text message to appear. Feeling the dry dust of suspicion rise in your throat with every minute of silence. You find yourself treating that delay as an active threat, and your mind instantly starts carving new notches into the tally stick of your mind. It is there when you lie awake at midnight, mentally restructuring a casual comment from an old friend, wondering if you are about to be cast out into the cold waters of rejection again. You might notice this exhaustion when you find yourself offering a polite smile during a modern workplace meeting, while your interior world feels completely dried out by a heavy, invisible resentment. We spend so much energy checking our applications for reassurance, looking for some digital validation that our relationships are perfectly secure and that no storms are gathering on the horizon. We compare our own messy, wounded interior with the carefully curated lives of people we have never met, feeling a quiet panic that we are falling behind in a race that has no finish line. When we feel the desperate urge to close our eyes, a wave of old guilt instantly blocks the door, whispering that we have not earned the right to let the rope slide from our hands. We treat our basic human need for quietness as a luxury that must be paid for with endless layers of hypervigilance and armor. But you can begin to practice a completely different way of moving through these small moments, using the quiet lesson of the desert outpost to reshape your days. When a sudden, cold message triggers that familiar heat in your chest, or when someone near you unleashes a wave of unthinking criticism, you can choose to introduce a tiny, silent pause before you react. Instead of automatically reaching for your thick rope to drag the memory of old betrayals into the present conversation, you can simply watch the defensive thought rise without giving it your alignment. You can observe the anxious impulse as it passes through your awareness, recognizing it as a passing gust of desert sand rather than a command to lock your heart behind iron bars. You can choose to care for the people in your world with a completely uncurled palm, offering a steady, clear presence without gripping their erratic behavior so tightly that your own wrists ache. Allowing yourself to step away from the struggle is not an act of weakness that requires a complex justification, nor is it a privilege you must purchase by carrying an extra load of anger first. Your right to breathe fully, to relax your jaw, and to let your mind grow spacious is a fundamental part of your nature, as natural as the deep earth absorbing the mineral salt without losing its ancient stability. You can let another person walk through their own confusion or their own bitterness, without assuming that you must weaponize your own mind to stay safe from their weather. By keeping the water in your own vessel clean, still, and clear, you are creating a genuine place of nourishment in a parched world. In a moment, as the final shadows of the evening cover the plain, we will allow this new way of being to dissolve into total rest, letting the words slip away so that your weary spirit can merge with the wide, uncomplicated silence of the night. The vast desert sky has fully opened its deep blue dome over the plateau now, and the pale sandstone walls of the canyon have entirely vanished into the soft purple dark of the evening. There are no more long caravan trails to navigate tonight, no more dry basins to cross through the stinging sand, and no more ancient iron tools to drag with trembling hands. The air inside your room has grown completely still, cool and crisp against your forehead, carrying none of the bitter mineral salt or the abrasive dust of the outer plains. Let your long limbs settle heavily into the welcoming support of the mattress, feeling your muscles take on the quiet, unmoving density of the stone outposts that have stood silent for hundreds of seasons. Your ankles are growing loose, your forearms are letting go of their old tension, and the flat palms of your hands are resting completely open against your bedding, uncurled, soft, and entirely cool. The rhythm of your breathing has settled into an effortless, quiet whisper, a gentle breath that expands and contracts without a single ounce of management from your conscious mind. With each slow exhalation, the deep knot behind your temples is unspooling, letting go of the persistent urge to protect your boundaries against an old injury. You can feel the immense stillness of the midnight hour wrapping around your body, a vast, protective circle that requires absolutely nothing from your spirit until the morning sun touches the floor. The world across the salt flat will look after its own stones, and the people who hurt you are held by the same deep earth that is currently cradling your own tired spine. You have left the heavy rope out on the trail, and your fingers are no longer locked around a notched wooden stick. Let the image of the volcanic stone well dissolve into the velvet darkness behind your eyelids, leaving nothing behind but a sense of profound undisturbed spaciousness in your chest. You do not need to drop a heavy iron hook into the dark to force an answer from the bedrock. Tonight, you do not have to prove your innocence or resolve the ancient argument before you are permitted to let your weight drop into the dark. The entire calculation has been swept away by the night wind. Your only true function right now is to let your own vessel rest quietly in its own space, trusting that the cool depth of the silence is perfectly capable of holding everything that has passed. The weight is gone, yet your position remains completely secure. The plain is still, the twisted juniper tree is resting under the stars, and the wide canyon is entirely safe without your vigilance to guard its borders. Let your mind become as clear and reflective as the dark water that sits undisturbed at the very bottom of the deep stone shaft. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to justify, and nothing left to carry through the dark. You are safe enough in this vast emptiness to let go of your defense mechanism completely. Sleep is waiting for you like a deep, cool basin where the water has finally settled into a perfect stillness that needs no more shielding from the world. What if the most profound protection your heart can ever possess is not the heavy iron of your armor, but the wide, open sky that allows the dust storm to pass through without finding anything to strike? The open sky remains untouched by the wind, holding the vast darkness with a quiet confidence that requires no walls or iron gates to preserve its integrity. This boundless evening space is a gentle reminder that your true nature is not the fragile clay vessel that was once cracked by the world, but the immense, silent awareness that contains both the storm and the subsequent quiet. The soft weight of your bedding presses against your frame like a cool hand, grounding you in this immediate sanctuary of rest, far removed from the sharp edges of past friction. Your breath continues its slow, unhurried dialogue with the midnight air, rising and falling with a rhythm as ancient as the turning of the earth. Let your heart align with this effortless movement, allowing each gentle exhalation to carry away the residual dust of the heavy equations you have tried to balance for so many years. When you look back at the long journey across the sun-baked plateau, you can see how often the mind confuses the memory of pain with the reality of safety. We hold on to our past injuries like prized possessions, polishing the details of how we were wronged, because we fear that if we forget the sting, we will become vulnerable to the next blow. We turn our historical grievances into a rigid framework, looking through the lens of old betrayals at every new face that approaches our circle. But this constant anticipation of harm does not change the behavior of others, nor does it heal the scars left behind. It only turns your current life into a continuous battlefield where the enemy has long since retreated. True emotional sovereignty is found when you realize that the person who hurt you has no power to control your current peace unless you continue to invite their ghost into your bedroom every night. Think of how much lighter the landscape becomes when you stop treating every defensive impulse as an absolute truth that must be acted upon. When a flash of old resentment arises during these quiet hours, you do not have to fight to suppress it, nor do you have to engage with its arguments. You can simply observe the heat of that thought from a safe distance, watching it drift across your awareness like a lonely spiral of dust moving across an empty plain. It carries no weight unless you choose to pull it into your body, and it has no authority to disrupt the heavy relaxation that is currently spreading through your limbs. You can let the memory exist as a finished event in the distance, a fixed point on a map you have already walked past, without allowing it to tighten the muscles of your neck or shorten the depth of your chest. As you lie here in the expanding stillness of the night, let a deep, unconditioned sense of self-forgiveness settle into the center of your chest. Forgive your own heart for all the times it hardened itself to survive, and for all the months you spent dragging a heavy maritime weight across a dry wilderness because you didn't know how else to keep yourself whole. You were operating out of a natural desire to protect your spirit from being broken again. But tonight you can acknowledge that the armor has become more exhausting than the warfare. You are allowed to lay down the shield simply because your arms are tired, without needing to verify that the outer world has become perfectly safe or entirely fair. Your worth is not measured by how long you can maintain a defensive posture against the past. The support beneath you accepts your full structure without making any demands, offering an unconditional pivot point where your body can finally let go of its long vigilance. You can feel your hips sinking deeper into the soft surface, your lower back releasing its hidden tension, and your legs growing incredibly heavy, as if they are turning into smooth, ancient boulders that have settled permanently into the cool desert soil. The small, frantic strategies of the day are over, and the wide expanse of the dark hours ahead is a completely unmapped territory where nothing needs to be guarded, nothing needs to be calculated, and nothing needs to be justified. Let yourself sink into this wide emptiness, recognizing that true strength is often found in the complete cessation of resistance. Your breathing has become a delicate, quiet thread of air, a soft movement that connects your internal space to the vast, silent operations of the natural world. The desert outside your room is resting quietly under the cold canopy of the stars. The juniper trees are standing still in the midnight air, and the deep well shafts are holding their cool water without any effort to push it toward the surface. You are a part of this same balanced order, a living expression of life that is permitted to turn off its watchfulness, to close its eyes, and to rest deeply without needing to earn the right to do so. The universe is cradling your existence with an immense, silent tenderness, whispering that you are secure enough to let the world unfold according to its own laws tonight. Let the final fragments of these spoken words dissolve into the background of your consciousness, losing their distinct edges and turning into a gentle, rhythmic hum that guides you closer to the threshold of a deep, restorative sleep. The path behind you has completely faded into the purple shadow. The heavy iron anchor has settled into the dust of the deep shaft, and your hands are entirely open on the blanket, resting like two empty vessels after the storm has passed. There is a beautiful velvet dark waiting to receive your spirit, a place where your defensive identity can soften, and your tired mind can finally merge with the infinite stillness of the night. Fall away from the calculations, drop the final threads of your ancient guardrails, and surrender completely to the deep, sweet sanctuary of a rest that knows absolutely no boundaries. The infinite stillness of the night stretches out to the very edges of your awareness, filling every corner of your room with a cool, spacious tranquility that belongs to you alone. This wide space of rest is a quiet testament to the fact that you do not need to maintain a state of internal warfare to protect your place in the world, while your body rejuvenates. The heavy, comforting embrace of your sheets forms a soft barrier between your present safety and the distant echoes of past misunderstandings or unresolved conflicts. Your breath continues its slow, unhurried rhythm, matching the deep silence of the midnight hours, rising and falling like a gentle tide on a completely forgotten shore. Let your heart settle fully into this natural movement, allowing each slow exhalation to wash away the very last traces of mineral salt and tight vigilance that your system has held onto for comfort. When you look back at the long stretches of your life where you felt most emotionally drained, you can see how often the mind mistakes a state of tension for a state of preparedness. We hold on to our historical resentments out of a deep, unexamined belief that if we let our guard down, we are somehow consenting to the injury or inviting it to repeat itself. We treat our old grievances as an essential armor, keeping the memories polished and sharp so that we can wield them like a shield whenever a new vulnerability approaches our circle. But this constant rehearsal of past harm does not alter the choices of those who hurt us, nor does it repair the fractures left behind in our foundation. It only transforms your current reality into a continuous, exhausting vigil. True freedom begins when you realize that keeping the memory active only keeps the old injury alive within your own chest, long after the external event has passed into history. Think of how much lighter the internal trail becomes when you choose to look at your thoughts as temporary visitors rather than absolute commands that require your immediate reaction. When an old memory or a flash of bitterness enters your awareness during these dark hours, you do not have to fight to suppress it, and you do not have to engage with its arguments to prove your innocence. You can simply observe the texture of that thought from a safe distance, watching it pass across your consciousness like a small wisp of desert mist, drifting over an empty sandstone plain. It has no physical weight unless you choose to pick it up, and it possesses no authority to disrupt the heavy relaxation that is currently flowing through your forearms and into your hands. You can let the past remain exactly where it is, a completed landscape behind you, without allowing its dust to shorten your breathing or tighten the muscles of your neck. As you lie here in the complete stillness of the late evening, let a wave of deep, unconditioned self-forgiveness soften the hidden corners of your chest. Forgive yourself for all the months and years you spent dragging that massive iron anchor across dry land, operating out of a natural human desire to protect your spirit from being discarded or broken again. You were doing the best you could with the tools you had, trying to buy your safety through hypervigilance. But tonight you can acknowledge that the weight of the armor has become heavier than the actual wilderness. You are permitted to release the rope simply because your arms are tired, without needing to change the past or force the world to apologize before you rest. Your value is not dependent on your capacity to maintain a defensive perimeter against things that are already over. The mattress beneath you takes your full weight with a steady, unconditional gravity, offering an immense platform of support that requires absolutely no performance or justification from your side. You can feel your hips sinking deeper into the soft surface, your spine releasing its hidden alignment of defense, and your legs growing incredibly heavy, as if they are turning into ancient river stones that have settled permanently into the cool earth. The small, strategic maneuvers of the day are completely finished, and the wide expanse of the dark hours ahead is an open territory where nothing needs to be built, nothing needs to be solved, and nothing needs to be managed. Let yourself slide down into this vast emptiness, recognizing that the highest form of wisdom is often found in the complete cessation of mental effort. Your breathing has become a delicate, quiet thread of air, a soft movement that connects your internal space to the vast, silent operations of the resting planet. The natural world outside your window is sleeping quietly under the starlit canopy. The desert plants are holding their moisture without struggle, and the deep wells are containing their clean water without any effort to force it upward. You are a living expression of this same balanced order, fully permitted to turn off your watchfulness, to close your eyes, and to rest deeply without needing to earn your place in the quiet dark. The universe is cradling your life with an immeasurable, silent tenderness, whispering that you are secure enough to let the world unfold according to its own natural timing tonight. Let the final fragments of these spoken words dissolve into the soft background of your awareness, losing their distinct meanings and turning into a gentle, rhythmic hum that guides you closer to the edge of a deep, restorative sleep. The path behind you has completely faded into the purple shadow. The heavy anchor has settled quietly into the dust where it can no longer scrape the walls, and your hands are entirely open on your blanket, resting like two empty vessels after the wind has died down. There is a beautiful, velvet dark waiting to receive your spirit, a place where your defensive identity can soften and your tired mind can finally merge with the infinite stillness of the night. Fall away from the calculations, drop the final threads of your ancient guardrails, and surrender completely to the deep, sweet sanctuary of a rest that knows absolutely no limits. The infinite stillness of the night remains unbroken, welcoming you deeper into its soft embrace where the heavy architecture of your protective habits can completely dissolve. This wide expanse of shadow is a quiet reminder that true security does not require you to keep your old grievances sharp while the rest of the world is asleep. The cool air in your room circulates gently around your face, lifting the last lingering traces of tension from your brow and leaving your skin feeling clean, clear, and perfectly still. Your breath moves with a slow, mechanical precision, rising from the deep center of your body and falling back into the dark like a drop of water returning to a silent pool. Let every muscle in your frame surrender its remaining vigilance to this rhythm, allowing the quietness to smooth over the rough edges of your mind until you are completely anchored in the present. When you look closely at the mechanics of your inner world, you can see how the habit of holding on to old injuries creates a false sense of control over an unpredictable reality. We tell ourselves that if we keep our bitterness alive, we will be prepared to detect the very first sign of a future betrayal before it has a chance to cut through our boundaries. We carry our old disappointments like a secret map, continuously cross-referencing our current interactions with the coordinates of past pain. But this constant filtering of the present through the lens of yesterday does not change the nature of the terrain ahead. It only keeps your feet trapped in the dry sand of a canyon you left behind months ago. True liberation occurs when you realize that your heart does not need to become an unyielding stone wall to survive the complex, fluid movements of human relationships. Think of how much wider the horizon becomes when you choose to let go of the need to have the final internal word in an argument that ended long ago. When an old memory or a flash of indignation rises to the surface during these late hours, you do not have to deploy your mental defenses to fight it, nor do you have to examine its validity to prove you were right. You can simply allow the thought to exist as a temporary event in your awareness, watching it lose its momentum and fade away into the darkness like a solitary ripple on a vast lake. It has no power to disrupt the deep, heavy relaxation that is currently spreading through your shoulders and down into your uncurled fingers unless you choose to tighten your grip around it. You can let the past remain entirely still behind you, a finished chapter in your journey, without allowing its dust to crowd your throat or shorten the natural expansion of your chest. As you lie here in the deep, undisturbed quiet of the late evening, let an immense wave of unconditioned self-forgiveness wash over the hidden chambers of your chest. Forgive yourself for all the times you mistook a state of hypervigilance for an act of wisdom, and for all the months you spent hauling a heavy iron ship anchor across a dry plateau because you didn't know how else to protect your spirit. You were doing the best you could to guard your vulnerability against an unyielding world, but tonight you can acknowledge that the weight of your armor has become more damaging than any threat outside your room. You are permitted to unfasten the harness simply because your spirit needs rest, without needing to verify that the future is perfectly certain or that every injustice has been repaired. Your value is completely independent of your ability to stay on guard against things that are already gone. The support beneath you takes your entire structure with a deep, unconditional gravity, providing a steady platform where your body can finally release its remaining armor. You can feel your hips sinking into the soft mattress, your spine flattening out into a posture of complete surrender, and your legs growing incredibly heavy, as if they are transforming into ancient river stones that have settled permanently into the cool earth. The strategic calculations of the day are completely finished, and the wide space of the dark hours ahead is a wide-open meadow where nothing needs to be managed, nothing needs to be solved, and nothing needs to be defended. Let yourself drop down into this vast emptiness, recognizing that the most profound healing is often found in the complete cessation of your internal defenses. Your breathing has become a soft and delicate thread of movement, a quiet tide that connects your internal space to the vast, silent operations of the resting earth. The natural world outside your room is sleeping quietly under the dark canopy of the sky. The desert plants are holding their moisture without effort, and the deep wells are containing their clear water without any pressure to push it toward the surface. You are a part of this same balanced order, a living expression of life that is fully permitted to turn off its watchfulness, to close its eyes, and to rest deeply without needing to justify its existence. The universe is cradling your life with an immeasurable, quiet tenderness, whispering that you are safe enough to let the world unfold according to its own natural timing tonight. Let the remaining fragments of these spoken words dissolve into the soft background of your consciousness, losing their distinct edges and turning into a gentle, rhythmic hum that guides you closer to the edge of a deep, restorative sleep. The path behind you has completely faded into the purple shadow. The heavy anchor has settled quietly into the dust of the deep shaft where it can no longer scrape the stone, and your hands are entirely open on your blanket, resting like two empty vessels after the wind has died down. There is a beautiful, velvet dark waiting to receive your spirit, a place where your defensive identity can soften and your tired mind can finally merge with the infinite stillness of the night. Fall away from the calculations. Drop the final threads of your ancient guardrails and surrender completely to the deep, sweet sanctuary of a rest that knows absolutely no limits.